Center. I've been a supplemental instructor for various econ classes for 5 or 6 semesters. This is part of an ongoing video series of tutorials to talk about historically difficult concepts in macroeconomics. So the concept we're talking about in this video is the idea of the money multiplier and fractional reserve banking. So the money multiplier is basically just a formula, which we have written down here. But first we're going to walk through kind of a real life example and show how the fact that we have fractional reserve banking creates how we can create money through that idea. So we have 2 different banks here. We have PNC and we have Citibank. And we'll start out with an initial deposit of, let's say, $1,000. So when you deposit this $1,000 into your PNC account, they take it and they take the deposit and the bank puts it into their reserves. And we're assuming a 10% reserve ratio in this problem, which means that of each deposit that the bank gets, they have to keep 10% of that in their vaults, in their reserves, and the rest they're allowed to loan out. So the bank keeps $100 as reserves, and the other $900 get loaned out. So eventually, that $900 that's loaned out makes its way to another bank, like Citibank. So we have a $900 deposit in Citibank. The same reserve ratio, this 10%, still holds in this example. So they keep $90 for their reserves, and the other $810 they loan out to a different bank. And this would keep happening from bank to bank to bank. So the purpose of this example is to show that from this initial $1,000 deposit, you can make loans that are greater than just that $1,000. So we have $900 loaned out from PNC, and then we have $810 loaned out from Citibank. And just from these 2 banks, we can see that the impact in the economy of this initial $1,000 loan is greater than just the $1,000. And if we kept going, this would continue to be the case. Each bank would get deposits, and they would continue to make smaller and smaller loans. So a common question that's asked on exams or on quizzes is kind of what's the total overall impact of this $1,000? And a quicker way to figure this out, instead of just going bank to bank to bank and adding up the loans, is to use this multiplier formula. And basically, this multiplier formula says that the total impact of the initial deposit equals the value of the initial deposit, or whatever kind of change is made, times 1 over the reserve ratio. So in this example, let's say our total impact is X. X would be equal to $1,000, which is our initial deposit, times 1 over 0.1, because we said the reserve ratio is 10%. So we would get a total impact of $10,000. So the question on the exam might say something like, what is the total impact in the economy from this initial $1,000 deposit? And we would say the answer is $10,000. But the trick behind this is if someone asks on the exam, what's the change in the money supply, then we need to go a step further, which is what this note reminds us of. So we've started out with this initial $1,000 deposit. When you deposited that $1,000 in PNC, you took that $1,000 out of the money supply. So first, our money supply has expanded by $10,000 because of all the new loans that are made from that initial $1,000 deposit. But we have to remember to take out this $1,000 because you initially deposited it and took that $1,000 out of the money supply. So our total impact on the economy is $10,000. But our change in the money supply equals $9,000. It's important to remember to subtract that initial deposit to account for changes in the money supply. So that's kind of a sample problem involving the money multiplier and kind of changes in fractional reserve banking. And I guess the only other thing I would say is when you're figuring out this formula, when you're putting pieces into it, remember that this reserve ratio is normally given as a percentage. So just remember to change it into a decimal and you'll be set.